Hello everyone, my name is Jordan, also known as Scraps. Today I will be teaching you the dubstep drums. Then later we'll move on to bass, and then finally after that we'll move on to rhythmic patterns for growls. So I'm gonna display a demo loop that I've made today. It was pretty tough making this, but I'm pretty sure you guys will enjoy it. Sit back, take a listen, and of course, enjoy. Alright, so the first steps to making a dubstep drums are to have a drum cell all ready to go. Now, the samples I'm going to be using are very different from yours, and your samples are going to be different from mine. That's no mistaking anything. But what I'm basically going to be teaching you is a formula, so that way you can take this with you and implement it to your own sounds. So for the drums, as far as simplicity goes, I'm going to make a very basic dubstep drum rack, and it's going to be finalized and finished, so that way when you guys start playing the drum cells and making loops for your songs, they will be finished. And the only thing you'll have to do is maybe do some peak removal and EQ to your other synths to make them a little bit fatter. I'll teach you that later on, but for now let's stick with drums. So for our drums that I'm going to be using comes from Sample Star, and Sample Star has some of the best kicks I've heard in a while next to Wave Alchemy. They have a nice rich full sound to their samples. So for the bass drum, I'm going to look for a low kick and a high kick, so that way when you play these at certain times in the segment piece, it will sound really large and fat. Oh, and I forgot to change my cues. So number 8 was a real nice low sounding one. And let's see. I don't want some that's too high, but 24 will work for me. That's perfect. We got a very nice punchy kick and a very nice low kick. So I'm just gonna rename these. That's kick. Called low kick. So for our first sample, I'm going to boost the release and right click and copy it to the other kick. I'm going to do that same thing with the spread, so we don't have to mess with it. I'm also going to turn on my filter and choose high pass and bring this all the way down to 58 Hertz. The reason why I'm doing this is so that way when you have a very low sub bass, it won't get in the way of your kicks. Gonna do that for the low bass, except I'm gonna set this to probably about clean. Next, we want to add our hi-hats. Our hi-hats are some of the biggest key points in dubstep. It keeps the rhythm of the track going. So I like the sound of real hats, so I'm just gonna browse. So 16 is a real one. .31 is another nice one. And I'm going to look for some high hi-hats and some quirky hi-hats, so that way when you start playing, it will have more rhythm instead of some plain notes. 37 is nice and high. I like that one. And 40 just adds that little bit of ambience to it. So I'm just gonna rename these hat 1, hat 2, hat 3, and hat 4. I'm just gonna edit this along when we start to build our tracks. So for our hat 1, It's nice, but there's a little bit of like weird, I don't know if you can see that. I'll probably zoom in a little bit later, but this noise right here is getting in the way of our hi-hat, so I'm just gonna remove that. Much better. I'm going to put on a filter. I'm gonna set it to our high pass 24, and I'm gonna leave it pretty high, so that way it's 673 hertz, Q at 0.7. I'm going to do this with the rest of the hats too. So I'm going to turn on filter, set it to high pass 24, and bring it down or up. Next, for our hat 3, I'm going to do that as well. I wish you could right click, so that way it would just copy. No, we just want this for the hats. Okay, that sounds nice. Gonna do that for the next high pass. That's better. Going to go about 40 for the spread, 41. Do it again for all the rest of the siblings. So those sound pretty nice. Next, I'm going to go for my cymbal. I usually like very clean crashes, so that way you can dirty them up when you get to that point. So I want to call this crash 1. Next, I'm gonna go for my snares and our claps. I like snares that sound like an actual snare and not like a clap. How can you tell me that's not a clap? That is definitely a clap. So we're going to use 30 and 31. With claps, you want to make sure that you have a little bit off time to it, so that way when you play it with the sample, it sounds like it has its own rhythm. So I'm going to rename this as clap and rename the snare as snare. Okay, so when building, or before we start building, I'm going to make sure this clap sounds fine. It has some lows that I would like to get rid of, so I'm going to choose a high pass and bring that down to about 330 should be fine. Okay, that snare sounds nice, but I would like to remove some of the lower ends. So I'm going to set this to about 208. That's much better. And do the release time for everybody about a second. Same thing for the spread. It's tedious work, but it really pays off. So now if we start building our drums, I'm going to set a very basic pattern, and I'm going to set the tempo to 144. So I'm going to delete the cell and create a new one, so that way it's on time. It's much easier than mucking about. So I'm going to set the length to a typical club loop, and that's about 5 bars. I'm going to set my fixed grid to a 4th. So every other 4th is going to be basically the main kick for typical dubstep. You can do this with 8s. Like, let's say if you want a little bit more rhythmic pattern, do it before 1-3 and shorten the loop, and do it after. So that way when you start, I'll just play you a demo example here in a minute. I'm gonna do this for 3. 3-3 should be good. I'm gonna triple that. And for the last one, I'm gonna just add 1 single cell. So that sounds pretty nice. But let's say you want your drum to sound a little bit fatter. What we can do is you can do your low kick on some of your triplet kicks, so that way every time it hits the triplet kick, it sounds a little bit fatter.